Okay, hello everyone, welcome to this GCSE video in the ecosystems topic at the end of GCSE, and I'm afraid it's another really cheerful one. Deforestation and climate change, another way in which humans are damaging our own environment, and of course I would be very surprised if you didn't know a bit about this topic already. So we're going to go through nice and quickly. I'm going to cram a lot in, including stuff that you can do to limit your own environmental impact, because I'm hoping, as you've got from this series so far, I think this stuff is really important. In fact, I would go as far as to say this stuff is really important. There is no think about it. Okay, so this is the bit of syllabus we're looking at, the idea of deforestation around the world. What is it, why does it happen, and how it causes global warming, the biological consequences of global warming. So I'm sure you know the process. Very quickly, if we start here with the basics, the idea that greenhouse gases are an important part of why life survives on this planet. They're like a big insulating duvet round us. Okay, so carbon dioxide is a particularly important one. Okay, sun's energy comes in, heats up the land, gets emitted from the land as infrared radiation, as heat. Okay, and then that is actually a bit of that, a proportion of that is trapped by the greenhouse layer, which keeps us nice and warm and insulated from space. Okay, now that obviously is a good thing, but if that duvet gets too thick, if that blanket gets too thick, then the surface temperature of the Earth warms up and up and up and up, and that causes radical and catastrophic changes to our weather, to our biology, and then has consequences for all of us living on this planet. Okay, so that's what the greenhouse effect is. It's basically the trapping of the sun's energy on the Earth by the greenhouse layer. It is a good thing on its own, but it's the runaway or the excessive greenhouse effect that we're worried about due to human-made CO2 and methane emissions. Okay, so it's a dynamic equilibrium. Like everything in biology, it's about balance. Okay, we will always emit carbon. Okay, always in the form of carbon dioxide. Carbon leaves living systems and non-living systems, geological systems, by burning and respiration. Okay, also then there's volcanic emissions of carbon and so on and so forth. Living things will always do respiration, which will release carbon dioxide. There will always be burning of stuff, which will release some carbon dioxide. But photosynthesis balances that out. So all the plants and all the algae doing photosynthesis take that in, and hopefully that stays in balance. If there's more burning and respiration than there is photosynthesis, you end up with more carbon in the atmosphere, okay, and in the seas and various other places. This is just like the carbon cycle, which you should have some knowledge of already, of which there is a basic diagram right here, as you can see. So we've got the air, and then obviously carbon dioxide coming into the plants through carbohydrates, through animals, through carbon dioxide and respiration, and back into the air. Okay, so it's a cycle and it's a balance, and we are disrupting that balance. Right, moving on by doing things like this. Okay, this is satellite imagery of a forested area. Unfortunately, it could be a number of places. I think this one is actually Congo, but it could actually be a number of places around the world. I have been privileged to go to an awful lot of pristine wildernesses, and the one thing I've noticed about pristine wildernesses is they are surrounded by areas that aren't pristine and where people are degrading those habitats in increasingly rapid order, right? Which is very worrying and very upsetting when you see it firsthand. Okay, so in terms of statistics, in terms of deforestation, what's actually going on? Well, if we look at these statistics here, from 1990 to 2013, the world lost more than the total area of South Africa, right? More than that entire country, in fact, more than that entire tip of a continent in forest. Okay, that's a statistic from the World Bank. 46% of trees on the planet have already been felled by human activity, and that was from a study in Nature 2015. Now in the UK, we are ahead of the curve with this. We have largely, which is not a good place to be, we have deforested our land hugely, right, over history, from a point where back in the Middle Ages, the UK would have been, huge percentage forest. Right, and even further back, you're looking at almost total forest coverage. Okay, we have deforested that, and we're now at 13%. Now that is an increase, right? The lowest ebb we got to was about 5% forest, which means that a lot of this forest that we do have is not the high value ancient woodland sites that have the highest biodiversity and the highest carbon storage value. Okay, so 13% of the total land area of the UK is now forest, according to forest research. It's based from DEFRA. And here's a graph to show you from the sort of 9th, 10th century up to now, what has happened to our amount of forest. So the Doomsday Book talks about 15% of the UK being forested. So you go further back in time than that. If you read this report here, the Government Forestry and Woodlands Policy Statement from January 2013, from DEFRA, if you go further back in history, you will find that actually the UK was more and more covered in forest, and obviously we've basically degraded it, and then after we had a strategic timber reserve after the First World War, which is what gave us that low ebb of about 5%. But thanks to the work of the Woodland Trust, now it's not perfect replacement, and other charities, we have actually had that wooded area going up. But as I say, it's new forest, it's new woodland. It doesn't have this ancient status that a lot of these forests do. So why do people do this? And this is directly from your syllabus. Agriculture, building, mining, timber. Okay, so agriculture, in particular cattle, very bad, and indeed farming the crops that feed the cattle, because a lot of cattle isn't grass fed in the world, it's fed on things like soybeans. And if you're basically growing a crop that humans could eat to feed it to cattle, to feed it to humans, that's not very efficient. See other lessons on that topic. Rice is a big one, big methane producer from paddy fields. Soybeans, we've just mentioned. Space for biofuels. So we're all going, yeah, very eco-friendly biofuels, but obviously if you're cutting down forest to grow crops to make fuel, then that is counterproductive. And of course palm oil, right? You will all have heard of palm oil. Palm oil plants are very efficient way of making oils, and they go in everything from our food products to cosmetics to all sorts of different things uses palm oil. And there's a lot of primary forest that's actually being damaged and removed to make space for palm oil plantations, particularly in places like Borneo and other parts of Indonesia. Okay, so that's obviously something you've probably heard of. We've got building, mining, timber, so the idea of stripping away a forest to get at what's underneath it, being that the land, or use the timber, or to dig for something underneath the forest. Big problem in South America with gold mining and so on and so forth. Okay, so it happens here as well. It's still happening. You'd think we'd have learnt our lesson now, but we absolutely haven't. So this is from the 20th of October 2020, so only a few months ago now, and right near to us. So this is outside Cubbington, near Leamington Spa. The Cubbington pear, which is an award-winning historic ancient tree which was felled to make way for HS2. Lots of people tried to save this tree, tried to protest that this is ancient woodland and we shouldn't be running railways through it. But the government and the lumberjacks went in there anyway and cut down this tree. And I think that is such a shame. That's an unbelievable shame. And essentially we don't even know if the railway will go through that particular area, or indeed if this railway is necessary. Okay, in fact on HS2, this is from a report from the UK Wildlife Trusts. The idea of what HS2 will do: it will destroy or severely damage 693 local wildlife sites, 108 ancient woodlands, which obviously is the point of this lesson, 33 legally protected sites of special scientific interest. And this is just to get people from Birmingham to London a little bit faster. Okay, and obviously with the last couple of years, have we not learned the lesson that actually most of the things we need to do can be done from home, and maybe we should invest in other forms of infrastructure like internet, high-speed broadband to rural areas. But that's just another thought that's a little off topic. But so we're still doing it, and some of the reasons are exactly the ones off your syllabus. Okay, so why is it a problem? Why is it bad? Well, if we compare these two photos, of course, up here you can see this is a primary rainforest that is beautifully biodiverse, contains a myriad of species and huge amounts of what we call ecosystem services in terms of keeping carbon out of the atmosphere, in terms of hosting potential medical cures, pharmaceuticals, so on and so forth, and preserving biodiversity. This down here is a plantation, a monoculture. As you can see, it is far less diverse. If we're turning this into this, then we are losing huge amounts of potentially human useful assets, ecosystem services, as well as I think that being morally fundamentally wrong. Okay, so anyway, and of course the losers, right, if I can do what the World Wildlife Fund would do and show you a cute picture to make the point, the losers are of course the species, particularly the large ones, that live in these environments. So the orangutans on Borneo being massively affected by palm oil plantations. You've probably all seen the stories. Okay, So, to give you something from my own experience, okay, now I could pick any of the countries that I've been to, and this is a consistent story where human needs come into conflict with the needs of forestry and the natural world. This is my trip to Madagascar in 2012, and we all think of Madagascar as looking like this, the trees and the lemurs everywhere, and to be fair, in places, it does. But Madagascar is over 90% deforested. Over 90% deforested. Okay, so while some of it, the bits you can go to and still see the lemurs, look like this, and the lemurs will come and sit right in front of you, and it's absolutely beautiful. We got that little patch there, but we'd actually driven solidly for a day and a half through this, okay, to get there from the airport. Okay, so that's what the reality is in Madagascar, one of the most important biodiversity hotspots on the planet. If you want to know more about Madagascar, then you can look at my Conservation Conversations topic playlist, which has an interview with my good friend over in Madagascar, Armand. So you can have a look at that and get a better insight of what it's like in Madagascar. So anyway, moving quickly on, this is a strange line that's on your syllabus, the idea that it's not just trees that can sequester carbon. This stuff called peat, which is essentially where trees, plants, things die, go into a partial state of decay on the way to coal, right? So on the way to coal, and they hold a huge amount of carbon in the soil. Now, peat can be a very good fertilizer and a very good fuel, but if you dig it up and let microbes get at it, or if you dig it up and burn it, of course that carbon that it's storing ends up back in the atmosphere. So you might be able to see these protesters here holding up, leave it in the ground, but that's exactly what we should do. So if we look at the International Union for Conservation, I think is what they're called, the IUCN, right, Important Conservation Organisation. This is a quote from one of their reports here. Damaged peatlands are contributing about 10% of greenhouse gas emissions from the land use sector. CO2 emissions from drained peatlands are estimated at 1.3 gigatons of CO2 annually. This is equivalent to 5.6% of global anthropogenic, that means human-produced CO2 emissions. So it's not just about trees, it's about peat as well. And the only reason I think we should be taking a little bit of peat out of the ground is to smoke grain to make Islay whiskey, right? And that's only acceptable reason, right? So this has been taken up actually quite well by gardeners and by farmers, the idea that you can get peat-free compost. And this actually is really the norm now. If you watch something like Gardener's World, as I do in the summer of a Saturday morning, because it's nice mindful TV, very relaxing, they're always talking about get a nice peat-free compost, get a nice peat-free compost, completely talking about peat-free, peat-free, peat-free. And this, if you go to a garden centre, is essentially pretty much what you'll find. So big conservation and environment win there, the move to having peat-free compost, okay, that we buy in bags. Right, so what's the consequence of all this deforestation, damage of peat bog? Well, you know this stuff already, particularly if you're geographers or if you've had your eyes open for the majority of your life, is that we are warming up the planet. We are increasing the effectiveness of the greenhouse effect and we are warming the planet. Okay, so here's a graph showing the average temperature for the middle of the 20th century when things were cooler down here, and you can see a very, very clear trend towards warming. Now I know there are those people who would say that it's the jury's out, that scientists are not sure, it's only a theory. Those people are wrong, okay? When we say the jury's out, what they mean is that scientists are 99.99999% certain, right, the scientific body, that human-produced CO2 is changing the planet, right? And that is as certain as any science can be. Theory means idea backed up by evidence, right? The fact the Earth is round is a theory. The fact that evolution happens is a theory. The fact that gravity exists is a theory. They are very, very good theories that explain the way the world works. That's what the word theory means. It doesn't mean guess that you can have a go at, okay? So if anyone tells you that this isn't happening, they're wrong, right? And that is just as simple as that. So obviously when we look at the CO2 levels here, look, you can see the CO2 levels rising about over the same sort of plan. Now this isn't brilliant science, but I'm going to put the two graphs on top of each other. So this is from our very own Met Office here. We've got the global temperatures since 1850. Okay, moving up, as you can see that increase in through the 20th century and up into the 21st century. And if I put that previous graph over, you can see it pretty much matches. Obviously not a brilliant thing to do to put two graphs with unmatched axes on top of each other, but the trend is very, very telling. Okay, so Obviously, this one I like as well. This is basically looking at the years, the coolest and warmest years, and basically ranking them by colour, where red is hot and blue is cold. As you can see, the Met Office's records run back to 1884. You can see where all the 5 warmest years are: 2014, 2006, 2011, 2007, and 2017. Okay, and you can see visually the difference in colours there, right, which shows that we are experiencing warmer and warmer climates, okay? And if you look further back through history using ice cores and various other data, this comes straight from NASA, you can see a very, very marked increase, right, in our carbon dioxide levels in the environment, okay? Now, obviously, that, when you look at it over that period of time, is absolutely staggering, right? It's absolutely staggering, and it's something we need to address now. Not tomorrow, not next year, not when the next government gets in or at the next conference, now, right? So, in terms of UK climate change, well, we can see it happening here. When I was at school, I was told if climate change continues, so this is 20 years ago for your reference, I was told if climate change continues, we're going to see warmer and wetter winters and more unstable weather. And what have we seen? My geography teachers were absolutely right. We've seen increased flooding. We saw a heat wave this time last year, 2020 heat wave, hotter and drier summers, and invasive species moving in. Now, if you ever say I don't bring you the most modern science, this is literally from this morning, right, where it was reported that an invasive brown marmorated stink bug has been found in 3 different places in the southeast of the UK, which obviously it couldn't have lived in because the cold would typically kill them. So this is an invasive species moving in through the country. Okay, and obviously, you know, this is only 3 examples that have been found, but the suspicion is there's an awful lot more. These are pests on crops, so they're going to directly affect the human food chain. Okay, and that is a consequence of climate change. So you might remember closer to home as well, the floods. There's really bad flooding here in Stratford-upon-Avon, and this was 2012. You may not remember that, but if you're particularly young doing your GCSEs, but if we go even more up to date, this is the Stratford Herald, so same place, 2020. The Bancroft there in Stratford-upon-Avon, completely underwater, February 17th. We've also got, you might remember, in 2019, when nationally a load of schools, roads, hospitals were shut. We had to send everybody home because of flooding in 2019. We had to close the school early on that. I remember it very well. It was supposed to be sixth form open evening, but of course we had to abandon the school and get everyone home. I had to drive through a lot of flood water to get back to my house. I know there were a lot of people who had to sleep in their cars. Okay, this is climate change, right? It is. Right, and then of course the other flip side, we've also got extreme heat waves which kill crops and cause human health issues. 2020 in August we had a record-breaking heat wave, sustained days of 34, 35 degrees C, and that is not normal for the UK, and it is not something that our environment and our wildlife can sustain for long periods of time. Okay, so what can we do? Well, there's this measure you will have heard of called the carbon footprint. I am sure your carbon footprint is measurable. The World Wildlife Fund have a little calculator which looks at things like transport, travel, you know, whether you go on holiday, what you eat, where you live, how many people in your house, so on and so forth, where you can get a rough idea of your carbon footprint and compare that to people in other parts of the world and so on and so forth. And it will give you a measure in tonnes. To give you an idea, the average person in the UK has about 10-tonne carbon footprint. When I was researching this, I got estimates between sort of 9.4 and 12.7. That was kind of the range there, but that figure of about 9.8 something or other comes from carbonindependent.org, which seem fairly reliable. Big contributors, and this comes from a 2020 report from the World Wildlife Fund, on sort of the UK's contribution to climate change, is the idea that we've got heating, car fuel, electricity, building, agriculture, air travel, and then this Open University diagram just here shows personal, as in your average, sort of the average UK person's individual carbon footprint. So personal car travel, going on holiday, going on a flight, about 12% in one hit going on flights. Obviously that will have dropped in 2020, but obviously will that come back when the pandemic ends? Who knows? Right, so there's some good news really on this as well, that the UK is aware of this and we are doing better. And you will have heard some stuff about our renewable energy and the fact that we were able to sort of not take power on various days from our coal power stations and all that kind of stuff and go fossil free for 48 hours. And these news stories are really hopeful. But there is a little kicker here, is the idea that yes, our territorial carbon emissions, so that's the carbon coming off the island of the UK, are down 41% since 1990. Fantastic, brilliant. But our overall footprint is only down 15%. So what that means is that that deficit, that gap, right, of that percentage, 20-something percentage of carbon, we're basically just offshoring it, right? We're moving that carbon footprint to other parts of the world, to other countries. And again, that comes direct from the World Wildlife Fund's report as well. You can look that up and see their figures on that. This graph just illustrates the same here, with the blue line being our UK's overall sort of footprint, but the lines here are our sort of territorial footprint. So we're not really changing our lifestyle very much. We're just making somebody else do it for us, which I think is a little bit wrong. Okay, we've got to own it. We've got to take responsibility for our own emissions. Okay, so what you can do, and this is something I did last night actually, where I was researching this, and I found this little trick that if you go to an organisation called the Wallacea Trust, they've currently got a Virgin Giving page where actually they've got groups in Sulawesi, an island of Indonesia, who are planting trees. Now obviously their usual thing is to have people go out and work with them, pay to do so, but they're not doing that at the moment. So they've actually said if you work out with the World Wildlife Fund what your carbon footprint is, then you can pay that amount. So it's, I think it's 2 trees, so for every $10, and that will be a ton of carbon over its lifetime. Okay, so I basically offset my entire year of carbon last night for about 50 quid, right? Which I thought, really, to offset your carbon, that's not a bad investment. Okay, so it's not difficult really. So this idea of carbon offsetting is a simple concept. It's one where essentially we will emit carbon just by breathing, just by existing. We're emitting carbon, but we need to ensure balance. We need to ensure that the environment in which we live in is able to take in all of the carbon that we are producing, right, and that we're not emitting more than is being taken in, because we can already see the effects on our planet of a runaway greenhouse effect. We can already see all the migration, all the flooding, all the changes of weather systems, all the fires in Australia last year, right? All of this is down to climate change, right? We can change it, we can do better, we can become carbon neutral, but we need to do it now, right? Sorry that was another miserable one. I'm afraid it doesn't get much better for the rest of this, but it is important. So thanks very much for listening, and I'll see you again. Bye-bye.